Hello, and I'd like to welcome you to Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, episode number 7. I'm grateful you selected this episode to occupy a small part of your day. On this episode, I'll explore what happened with our racers as they ventured to a new country for the Amazing Race. This episode was chock full of events and twists. If you're ready, let's get started. I'm your host, Jason Mogul. At the end of the last episode, episode number 6, Pops and Jeff were eliminated after a close foot race to the pit stop mat in Dubai. Just seconds separated them from Nick and Mike. Online comments overwhelmingly showed viewers were disappointed in the elimination of Pops and Jeff. They were a popular team and had a close father-son relationship. There was hardly a harsh word from either one of them or about them from viewers. But moving on to episode 7, there were 7 teams remaining in the race, and we saw from the previews that teams will have to navigate themselves while driving and face another double U-turn. Those kinds of events usually bring drama and comedy and potentially heartbreak. In Dubai, it was Carson and Jack who left the pit stop first in their trademark green shirts at 12:34 p.m. They found out they were headed to Bulgaria. This was the first time in Amazing Race history that teams raced in Bulgaria. Once teams entered Bulgaria, it would be the 102nd country ever visited by the Amazing Race, by my count. Bulgaria, if you're curious, is about the size of the state of Virginia. In the cab on their way to the airport, Carson commented on how calm Jack has been in stressful situations, but wondered out loud how they would do at self-driving and navigating in Bulgaria. Jack just stared and looked kinda zoned out. Here was another foreshadowing moment of what's to come. Han and Holden left the pit stop next, about 40 minutes later. That's how much time Carson and Jack earned by doing the scuba diving fast forward. Alyssa and Josiah left in third place just 5 minutes later. All teams took a taxi straight to the airport, with the last place Nick and Mike leaving about an hour after the first place Carson and Jack. But once at the airport, all teams traveled on the same flight to Bulgaria, with little or no drama regarding trying to get on the fastest flight or getting on standby for better flights or none of that. It seems that the how and where to get airline tickets had already been decided for the teams. So far this season, it seems the emphasis has been on the tasks, with less emphasis on navigation or ticket buying. Perhaps that will change in future episodes. So at this point, you may wonder what the big deal is about the fast forward. Why would a team take the risk and do the fast forward if the lead they gained is just going to be negated later at an equalizer, like the airport? In this case, Carson and Jack gained a 40-minute lead on the other teams, only to have that to go to a 0-minute lead at the airport. Is the fast forward even worth it? I wondered that too, and here's my take. By doing the fast forward, a team does take a risk because fast forwards are usually hard, and they can even trip up a team, like Jason and Amy in season 23, when they couldn't do the bungee jump due to high winds in Austria, or Brendan and Rachel in season 20, when she refused to have her head shaved in India. Both teams lost time attempting the fast forward in those examples. But on the other hand, a team does skip all tasks, and they also skip other potential disasters, like bad cab drivers, traffic jams, etc., that may trip them up. If completed quickly, teams can stay in front of the competition and race another day, avoiding the last-minute foot race to the pit stop mat, which is even riskier. If given the opportunity, and if not weather-dependent, I think teams should go for the fast forward, even with the possibility their lead may vanish due to equalizers. But I think they should skip it if the clue says the task is weather-dependent. That is put on the clue because somebody knows something and is a red flag to me. Okay, back to the race. It's a 5.5 hour flight from Dubai to Bulgaria. Not too bad. Once they landed in Bulgaria, all teams were within feet of each other as they exited the airport to get their cars. They were Ford station wagons with manual transmissions. Manual transmissions. That could lead to trouble. But teams didn't seem to have too much trouble driving a stick shift, except for Brett and Mark and Han and Holden, who had issues figuring out how to shift into reverse. Mark showed Holden how to get into reverse in exchange for getting out of the garage before the siblings. In the US, only 18% of drivers know how to drive a stick shift. In later model manual transmission cars, there's usually a lockout feature drivers need to overcome to get into reverse, like pulling a separate lever or pushing straight down on the stick while shifting into reverse. This prevents accidentally shifting into reverse while driving to avoid damage or accidents. A little rubbing of paint resulted, but off they went with their big maps. They were headed to a village called Negushevo, which is a short distance east of the airport, and it appears to me there's only one road in or out. Alyssa and Josiah seemed to have no issues navigating, nor did Jonathan or Anna. Erica, however, was not accustomed to paper maps and had to adjust quickly. Nick and Mike talked about how Bulgaria reminded them of their mom and how they missed her. Uh-oh, more foreshadowing? It was Carson and Jack who were completely befuddled by navigating in another country. They had no idea where they were or where they were going. Carson would ask, "Should I turn here?" And Jack would reply, "I don't know." That was not good. Jonathan and Anna and Alyssa and Josiah arrived first at the village and learned they had to transport 2 crates of apples on a wooden cart and hand carry a crate of apples to the altar of the Kukeri as an offering to ward off evil spirits. The Kukeri was a wild and crazy and loud event, and it seemed like teams really enjoyed that. Once delivered, they received their next clue, which told them to drive themselves to the library in Osoitsa village, which is about 5 to 10 miles northeast of Negoshevo, for their next clue. Brett and Mark arrived third. Han and Holden were fourth. Melinda and Erica came in fifth. Nick and Mike arrived sixth after getting lost themselves. But Carson and Jack, a usually strong team, were still hopelessly lost. As so many other teams in the past say, when the situation looks hopeless, they said maybe other teams were having a harder time of navigating than we are. Ha! No chance of that. They stopped to get directions and then drove for a little while. Then a little later, they stopped again to ask directions, and we saw on their map that they were way off course. They still had a lot of driving to do. They mentioned they were 3 hours behind, although I don't know how they knew that. It was Jonathan and Anna who arrived first at the library and found their next clue. It was a detour, haystack or woodstack. In haystack, teams had to find a red and white loop of what looked like twisted string to get their next clue. Phil called it an adornment. It was about the size of a bracelet. Teams had 3 haystacks to comb through to find one. This is the classic Amazing Race needle in a haystack task. It involves physical work and also a lot of luck. In woodstack, teams had to use a wooden backpack and a wooden Fred Flintstone-like wheelbarrow that had a wobbly wooden wheel to transport 440 pounds of firewood to a local home. That's a lot of firewood. But the locals measured it in kilos, which made it seem like a lot less. In reality, multiple trips would be necessary to accomplish this. This was quite a physical task, with stronger teams having the edge. Both Jonathan and Anna and Alyssa and Josiah picked haystack. But when Jonathan arrived to do the detour, he drove past the designated parking area and parked their car in a ditch. Ignoring it for the time being, they went off to do haystacks. Brett and Mark arrived, and they picked woodstack. They went with the more physical task because they knew from past Amazing Race seasons, like in Season 6, when Lena spent over 8 hours looking for a clue in a hay bale, yet never found it, that it could be a team killer. Once they got started, Jonathan immediately regretted doing Haystack and blamed Anna for picking it. But if you go back and look at what actually happened in the library, she asked him if they should do Haystack. He mumbled and off they went. She didn't pick it. She suggested it. Yet he kept blaming her for the choice and possibly losing the race. He really harped on that a lot. Alyssa and Josiah showed up at the haystacks, and after just a short time, found the bracelet in their first stack. They moved on to find their next clue at a church, where they would encounter the double U-turn. Meanwhile, Jonathan continued to blame Anna for their choice. Melinda and Erica arrived at the library and picked Haystack, mainly to avoid the heavy work of transporting the firewood. Han and Holden came next and picked Woodstack. So, at the double U-turn, my expectation was that any team that had a chance to U-turn another team would take that opportunity at this point in the race. But when Alyssa and Josiah arrived there first, they decided not to U-turn anyone. Huh? What? I fully expected them to U-turn Jonathan and Anna, or even Carson and Jack. But they said they didn't want any blood on their hands. It just doesn't make sense to me. If we look back at the live vote double U-turn in Season 5, Alyssa and Josiah voted to U-turn Jonathan and Anna, their perceived strongest team. I know perhaps they didn't want to vote, but they did vote against their toughest competition, not a weaker one. But now, in Bulgaria, 2 legs later, and the likelihood of more U-turns in the future being slim, they didn't U-turn Jonathan and Anna, or anyone. Their 2 vote outcomes are the exact opposite of what I would expect a logical team to do. Perhaps they felt guilty after the first time. But feel guilty? I mean, in Monopoly, no one feels guilty when taking money from someone who lands on your property with hotels, right? Jonathan and Anna found their bracelet and showed up at the U-turn, and they didn't U-turn anyone either. Again, a very strange choice to me. My expectation was for them to U-turn Carson and Jack, or Brett and Mark. But nothing. Not even Nick and Mike, who had voted against them in the U-turn in Episode 5. Even Brett and Mark decided not to U-turn anyone. So given these choices by these teams, the U-turn would not be used offensively to try to eliminate strong teams, but instead, it would be used defensively by other teams to avoid elimination. Even Melinda and Erica felt bad for U-turning Nick and Mike, but it was Phil who pointed out that if they hadn't done that, elimination might have been their fate. There's no reason, in my opinion, to feel guilty for playing by the rules. Okay, when trying to leave the detour to get their next clue, Jonathan and Anna's car was stuck in a ditch he parked in. He tried backing out, tried turning his wheels, and even stuck some plywood under the front tires to get traction, but nothing worked. Han and Holden and Melinda and Erica just ran past the stuck car, but Brett and Mark arrived and they tried to help push the car out. Again, what? I was flabbergasted that a team would help a competitor in this way. How do you feel about that? But even with Brett and Mark's help, they didn't get the car unstuck. Jonathan and Anna didn't know what to do next. But then he saw locals coming, grabbing some branches to put under the tire. Jonathan thought the locals had some special knowledge or skills to get the car unstuck, and it was as if he was saying, "Yay, the locals will come to our rescue because they do this all the time." But all that happened was that there was just a big bird's nest of sticks under the car that didn't help. Anna cried, and Jonathan felt defeated. Finally, someone had a tow rope and pulled them out. But because of the delay, they slipped to 3rd place. At this time, Nick and Mike showed up and picked Woodstack. Meanwhile, Carson and Jack were still lost, and everyone else seemed to forget about them. They hadn't even done the apple task yet. It looked like it was all over for them. being so far behind. Alyssa and Josiah drove in first place to the next task, which was to milk sheep and get half a liter of milk and then eat some Bulgarian yogurt with a 102-year-old woman. She ate a lot of yogurt that day with all the teams coming to visit her. At her age, she had lived through the Depression after World War I, then survived World War II, then lived behind the Iron Curtain, saw the breakup of the Soviet Union, and now lived in modern times. She is a survivor for sure. Back at the detour, it took Han and Holden 3 trips to transport the firewood, and it looked like Nick and Mike would do it in just 2 trips. Melinda and Erica continued to search the haystacks. But Nick and Mike were just 1 kilo short of wood on their second trip and had to go back and make yet another trip. Melinda and Erica found the bracelet about the same time Nick and Mike finished their third trip, and it was a race to get to the U-turn. It was Melinda and Erica who arrived first and U-turned Nick and Mike. Nick and Mike then U-turned Han and Holden. And here we go. So at this point, it seemed from their perspective, the race was down to Nick and Mike and Han and Holden on who would be eliminated. But they forgot about Carson and Jack, who were slowly catching up. And at the front of the pack, Alyssa and Josiah arrived at the pit stop mat in first place and won a trip to Morocco. Brett and Mark arrived in second place, and Jonathan and Anna arrived third. Meanwhile, back at the detour, where the main story was really happening, both Nick and Mike and Han and Holden were looking through the haystacks simultaneously. Han and Holden had a slower but more disciplined technique, while Nick and Mike's technique was kind of wild and random. But it was Han and Holden who finished first after 2 haystacks and moved on. Nick and Mike thought they were last, but they kept looking, exhausted. But then, Carson and Jack showed up at the detour. Nick and Mike had new hope that they were not last after all. Carson and Jack had to decide which one to pick. They feared what Nick and Mike had been going through, but it was a tough decision. They could pick Woodstack, which was tough, but there was a finite goal of 440 pounds. Or go with Haystack and base their future on luck. It could be good luck, like Alyssa and Josiah, or bad luck, like what Nick and Mike were experiencing. After trying Haystack, they switched and decided to go with Woodstack. They struggled through the hard physical aspect in 3 trips, counting on Nick and Mike's continued bad luck. In the end, Carson and Jack picked the right one and moved on, finishing in 6th place. Phil had to go out into the field after Nick and Mike had worked for 6 hours, like he had in Season 6 with Lena, and tell them that they were eliminated. That was another tough elimination involving hay. Nick and Mike struggled the entire race, but had found a way to continue to race after each leg. But on this leg, they had issues in 3 areas. First, it took a long time to navigate through Bulgaria. Second, they had to make 3 trips with the wood, being just 1 kilo short on the second trip, which caused them to get U-turned and have to do the haystacks. And third, they had bad luck at the haystacks. Even a small improvement in any one of those areas would have allowed them to stay ahead of Carson and Jack. And as for the winner of the leg, Alyssa and Josiah, they succeeded because Alyssa was a great navigator, and they were lucky at the haystack, finding the bracelet much quicker than the others. After the live vote double U-turn, if you recall, Nick and Mike vowed revenge against Jonathan and Anna for voting to U-turn them. But Nick and Mike never really had a chance to extract that revenge. Looking ahead, there is another express pass up for grabs in the next episode, and that could be huge for teams like Melinda and Erica and Han and Holden. This episode 7 had some key decision points for teams. It will be interesting to see if U-turn decisions in Bulgaria plays a role in the future. Carson and Jack's decision to switch detours and go with Woodstack did pay off for them, allowing them to pass Nick and Mike. But now they need to play catch-up to the other teams. Will we see a non-elimination leg this season? No mention of one yet. And will there be any more surprises and twists like we have seen in the previous legs? And what about Jonathan? There was a lot of negative online comments about him. I want to like him because he is competitive and generally makes good strategic decisions and says the right thing to the camera. But the way he treats Anna sometimes makes me wonder who the real Jonathan is. In reviewing some of my past observations, Melinda doesn't seem to be too bothered by her leg cramps she had earlier. And she and Erica haven't bickered with each other that I've seen, like Erica also noted earlier. What will trip up teams during the next leg? And which team will face a challenge that they just can't overcome? Oh, I'm always looking forward to the next leg. How about you? That's all for today. Thanks for listening, and join me next time for episode number 8 of Jason's Amazing Race Recap 37, and we'll see what more the racers have to offer Bulgaria. See you then.